What is it about having a great mealtime together that's relaxing and enjoyable?
Really just a cool time to just like reframe life.
We go around the table and we talk about what was the best part of your day.
If we were home, we sat around the table and had a meal together.
It's super cheesy sometimes, and like, tell me one thing you love about your brother.
I had the same 3 meals, like just over and over and over.
We try to make it where we don't talk about work at all.
Who was the best behaved of the kids?
Oh, me.
Jesus, the night before he died, he sat down and had a meal with his disciples.
There is something about being able to just sit down and have a meal with somebody that is just disarming.
I've been in several groups, and I've seen both sides.
Your group actually becomes your family.
It's a commitment really from everybody that's just like, if we're going to be a part of this group, we're going to be in each other's lives.
Well, hello, One Life. I'm glad everybody's here, and I want to open today by showing you a picture, okay? This is a picture of my wife and I that was taken just a few years ago and at a party, and I'm the one on the right. I want you to just kind of remember that shot there. We've been married 31 years, and there you go. And you can go ahead and take that off. And I don't know if you've heard this or not, but Facebook has a feature. It's called Frames, and it was kind of their answer to Snapchat. And what they do, and you can like put captions on your pictures, you can frame them, put decorations, all that sort of thing on your pictures. But also what it does, it has an algorithm apparently that goes through your pictures and suggests captions and framing for that. And my wife, she has it, I don't use it, but Facebook grabbed this picture of us, and this is the caption that they put on it. For those of you who may be wondering, we were born in the same year. Yeah, I never liked Facebook anyway. There's lots of reasons not to. So that was an interesting thing. And the reason I show you that is because I genuinely thought it was funny. But also my wife has been having a blast with that. She thought this is the greatest thing ever. And but I also wanted to introduce our topic with it. Today's topic is humility, and which I learned very well. Humility, and the basis of humility is first of all reality. To get to humility, you just need to face reality. Obviously, the years have been a little kinder to my wife than they have me, right? So, and we're talking about humility, especially because we're in this series called The Table, and the table is a metaphor for the local church. And it's just kind of looking at what God has to say about the local church, and we're trying to rediscover that it's actually a beautiful thing, a great thing, it's a wonderful thing, even though many of us could say we've experienced it in a not so beautiful way. We've experienced hypocrisy, we've experienced all kinds of issues and problems and challenges and disappointments in the context of the local church. So we're trying to surface what is the church supposed to be, with the end goal at One Life is not only for everybody to understand what the church is really all about, but also to express it in teams and groups. We say that we do life in groups and teams, and we're trying to elevate our growth group experience especially, but also we are run off of teams. And what we want is for everybody to be able to gather up in these smaller groups so you can experience church the way it was really supposed to be experienced outside of the larger gathering like we're having right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to read a passage that I introduced last week, and I said it was going to be the springboard for the rest of the time that we have together. We're going to end our series on October 28th, by the way, with a baptism service. If you've never been to our baptism services, they are fantastic. It's just a great time. We listen to stories all day long, and it is wonderful. So October 28th, if you've never been baptized after following Christ, that's your day, all right? That's going to be the grand finale of this series. So I'm going to read Romans 12, chapter 1 and following here in just a moment. But I want to remind you the setup that we did it. Romans chapter 12 is preceded by Romans chapters 1 through 11, okay? That's a brilliant insight, isn't it? There's 11 chapters, but here's what's important about that. It's 11 chapters of celebrating the wonder and the beauty of God's mercy and His grace. In other words, Romans chapters 1 through 11 is considered by many to be the most in-depth explanation of what the good news of Jesus really is, who He is, what He did, and what it means for you and I. That there's no way on earth that any human being can make himself right before God, the judge of all the earth. That the way to be right before God is to trust in what Jesus did on the cross and His resurrection from the dead and follow Him, and that's what makes you right before God, and it's a gift. And he spends all this time establishing this, looking at it from all these other angles, and then he comes to the passage, Romans 12:1. It says this, "Therefore, I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God," he's pointing back to everything he just said for a long time, "to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship." So in other words, you're supposed to be looking at the grace of God. I have this gift. I'm right with God, not because I've earned it or I deserve it, but because he did it for me. And so what should I do in response? And he says, therefore, here's what you do. You offer your body. You offer it in gratitude. I also gave you this quote last week. I love this from one theologian who said, always remember this, in the New Testament, religion is grace and ethics is gratitude. In the New Testament, religion is grace, ethics is gratitude. And that's what he's kind of summarizing there. And then after that verse, he spends the rest of the book, which goes on to chapter 16, pretty much just giving these ethical challenges. Here's how we ought to live. Here's how we ought to respond to government, to relationships and everything else. Now watch what he says. We read this paragraph last week. We focused on one sentence. I want to go on to another one. It says Romans 12:9 through 13. Let love be without hypocrisy. Abhor what is evil. Cling to what is good. Now here's one we looked at last week. Be devoted to one another. And that's the church. That's the local church idea and teams and everything else. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. And here's the one I'm going to focus on this week. Give preference to one another in honor. Give preference to one another. That's the church again. It assumes that reality that you're in a community. To one another in honor, not lagging behind in diligence, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, persevering in tribulation, devoted to prayer, contributing to the needs of the saints, and practicing hospitality. That whole thing of give preference to one another in honor is another way of saying be humble. Have humility. Show humility towards one another. And so what I want to talk about for the rest of the time, I want us to explore this concept of humility. Hopefully you don't have to get it through humiliation brought to you by the algorithms of Facebook, but we want to talk about humility because there's a few reasons that we'll kind of walk through that's very, very, very important to do. And the first thing I want you to do with humility, and it's going to sound kind of tongue-in-cheek and a little bit dumb to say it this way, but the first thing I want you to know and remember about humility is to be proud of it, okay? Be proud of humility. And what I mean by that is to know that humility is supposed to be one of the key cultural markers of any local church. I don't know if you've ever been to larger cities where they have an Apple computer store. Have you ever walked into an Apple computer store? It has a vibe, it has a look. It has a thing like everybody's much younger than you if you're like me, and they're people that are hipper than you, they know more than you, they're edgier than you, they're more progressive than you, and that's their staff, okay? That's the culture. You walk in and it's all clean cut, and it's got that Apple look to it. It's just a cultural marker. It's progressive. Well, the church is supposed to be a place that is marked. When people come in, it's supposed to be like this community of people who are marked by humility. And we need to know that. It's actually the jersey that a church is supposed to wear. This is who we are. We are the people that are humble. Now to get to this idea, I want to show you a clip here in a minute on video that was actually shot a few years back. We host every year a thing called the Global Leadership Summit, and it's 2 days of leadership training from some of the best in the world. We've had Colin Powell and Simon Sinek this past year, and it's great teaching between 2 days on leadership. And one of my favorite talks I've ever heard, and I've been on a number of these, was who you're about to hear from. His name is John Dixon. And John Dixon is a PhD in ancient history at Macquarie University. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right or not. It's a university in Australia, focusing on the birth of Christianity in its Jewish and Greco-Roman context. There's his scholarly pedigree, and he spoke at the GLS. He's also the founder of a thing called the Center for Public Christianity. And what he was commissioned to study why in Western culture we admire humility. Because those like him who knew things about the ancient world knew that the ancient world did not admire humility. They admired just the opposite. But we know that in Western culture, we admire people who are humble. We're attracted to them. And they were commissioned, him and his history department, were commissioned to go and look why. So I want you to hear from John Dixon. Watch this.
one of the prized virtues in ancient Greece was philotimia, love of honor. To pursue your honor was a great good. So how have we now in Western culture come to prize humility and despise honor-seeking? This is exactly the question our little research group at Macquarie University was exploring. And you need to understand this was an entirely secular university in a secular ancient history department. And what we found was utterly convincing. A humility revolution took place in the middle of the 1st century with the teacher from Nazareth, who taught incredible things like, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant. But we found that it probably wasn't Jesus' teaching as such that created this humility revolution, because of course we have little hints of humility in the Old Testament. What we found is that it was Jesus' actual crucifixion that changed the way ancient people thought about humility and greatness. Let me explain, and I hope this is not too nerdy for you. Crucifixion in antiquity was the summum supplicium, the ultimate punishment, the lowest place in the Roman world. And so the cross of Jesus posed a massive problem to the first Christians. Does Jesus' crucifixion mean that he is not as great as we thought? Or does it mean we have to redefine greatness to fit a cross in? They opted for the latter, of course. Their reasoning, it seems, went like this. If the greatest man we have ever known willingly sacrificed his life on a cross, the innocent for the guilty, then greatness must consist in willing sacrifice, in holding power for the good of others. And we can date this precisely. Here is the first text in the history of literature to connect greatness with humility. And it does so in explicit connection with the cross. The Apostle Paul writes to the proud Roman colony of Philippi and says these amazing words, in humility, consider others better than yourselves. Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing. He humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross.
I love the line, a humility revolution happened. In the local church, what we are supposed to be, we're a part of a humility revolution. That's what we're carrying on. We say around here, we have a value of, we believe you can bring your brain to church. I wanted you to hear from a scholar talking about this. They did this objective research project out of a secular university where they went and said, where did this stuff come from? And they said the first, I love that whole thing of the first known place in all of human literature where humility was talked about and it was associated with greatness was Paul's letter to the Philippians. That's amazing. So that's what I mean by being proud of humility. Churches are supposed to be marked by it. It's serious subject matter inside the church to give preference to one another in honor. That's how they're supposed to work. Now here's the problem with humility. It's kind of tricky, isn't it? It's like the ultimate in mental gymnastics, okay? You're about to hear the greatest message on humility in the history of the world. You know, this is going to be a great message on humility. I can't wait to share it with you. No one can write the book, Humility and How I Achieved It, you know. You see inside your mind sometimes, being humble, check me out. All right, humble man, I'm gonna put on a t-shirt. There's these loop-de-loops. You feel like it's a mental trick. You have to play on your mind. I'm being humble. So the next thing I would say is not only be proud of humility, but let's understand what humility actually is. And that's very, very, very helpful. And I'm going to give you a quote from John Dixon. His book, Humilitas, I highly, highly recommend it. It's one of my favorite books I've ever read. And he gives this definition of humility that's very, very helpful. Listen to what he says. Quote, humility is the noble choice to forgo your status, deploy your resources, or use your influence for the good of others before yourself. More simply, the willingness to hold power in service of others. Humility is not a mental game that you have to play. It's simply saying, I have power, I have influence, I have giftings, I have a life, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose to hold that willingly in service of other people before myself. Our church, we've gotten criticized many times through the years. I don't know how many of you were told this, but several years ago, we were called a cult. We were. I mean, congratulations. Thank you very much. Some of you are like, you were? Why? Come to Kickstart, and we'll explain that, whether we are or not. We've been called a cult. We got some weird phone call this weekend. We've seen things on Facebook, and one of my favorite recent criticisms was of me. And one guy put, if Bret Nicholson wouldn't have had Bob Seymour in his corner, he never would have stood a chance. That's what somebody leveled at me. Now, for those of you who don't know who Bob Seymour is, he's the CFO of our organization. He's one of our founders. He's on our board of directors. He's kind of known by a number of people, but not known by others. But he and I have traveled in ministry for a lot of years, and this person observed and kind of said it was a slam on me to say, if it hadn't been for Bob, I wouldn't have got anywhere. And you know what I thought was, well, what's your point? Ooh, burn, Well, of course, that's absolutely true. I would not have gotten nearly as far in my life if it hadn't been for Bob Seymour, or my wife, or a person named Natalie, or another named Sarah, or a guy named Matt, or a guy named Zach, or a pastor named Ryan, or a friend named Jeremy. I'm surrounded by people in the community that I would never, ever, ever be anything that God had given me the potential to be without them. That's the point. The church is supposed to be this place that holds power in service of one another before ourselves. And I experienced that from Bob. I've experienced that with a whole list of people that I could spend the rest of this message sounding like I'm accepting an Oscar and just go on and thank and thank and thank and thank and thank to the point where you would be throwing things. But I could, no problem at all. I absolutely am the product of so many other people serving me and helping me, and hopefully me helping them as well. Matter of fact, speaking of Bob, as I was processing this definition, give preference to one another and honor. Humility is taking your resources and your influence and holding power in service of others. And you need to know this, because the best example I could think of that I know of currently is our church over in Henderson especially. We have a passion to reach under-resourced neighborhoods. And there's an area over under-resourced neighborhoods, every community has them, where crime's a little higher and incomes are lower than most other places in the community. And so when we first went over to Henderson, we went into a neighborhood they nicknamed the East End to see what we could do to help with that challenge. And I remember going door to door, and I remember community meetings and whiteboarding things and all this. But Bob and some others along with him stayed with that over the last 8 years and have just continued to impact that neighborhood, get to know the neighbors. And they finally came out through all kinds of surveys and stuff on what was really needed there and what the neighbors really wanted. And it was an after-school program. And it's named the Audubon Kids Zone. And it's based upon a model out of New York. But you know what the Audubon Kids Zone does? You know what it is? It's an after-school program where these leaders like Bob and a guy named Rob and another woman by the name of Tammy Sutton and others, they set up this after-school program where there's 35 children representing 35 families. And they not only do after-school work, but they have said, our goal is to stick with your child and with your family through grade school, middle school, high school, until they get into college. We're going to take our influence, our business acumen, our education, or whatever, and we're going to serve you so that your child out of this under-resourced neighborhood can go to college. Is that cool or what? It's a phenomenal example of exactly what that definition is. Holding power in service of others. I know Rob, and I know Bob, and I know Tam, and I know these are people who are great in business. They've got degrees. They have theirs. They don't have to do that, but they want to hold power in the service of children who wouldn't otherwise have those kind of opportunities. That is humility. It's not a matter of doing some kind of gymnastics inside my head. Am I feeling bad about myself or anything like that? It's not looking at myself that way. It's me taking my gifts, whatever I have accessible to me, and using it in service to others You see, this whole thing of, it's fascinating to me as we kind of go through this stuff in our mind. In my personal Bible study time, we challenge you all the time to get into the Bible on your own. And I'm doing that. And right now I'm in the Gospel of John, just in my personal walk. And it's a study of the life of Jesus, one of the 4 biographies in the Bible. And here's what I'm most fascinated by. Jesus is the exemplar, as you heard from John Dixon a while ago, of humility. He died on the cross. He came as a servant. But the whole book of John is structured around Jesus' proclamations about who he is. And here's what strikes me as much as anything. Jesus knew who he was, where he was going, what he was doing. He even has one line, I love it. He tells his enemies that are criticizing him. He says, I know where I come from and I know where I'm going. And then in other places, he says things like, the whole book of John is structured around his proclamations about himself. He says, I am the light of the world. I am the good shepherd. He makes these proclamations. I am the resurrection and the life. In other words, humility has nothing to do with levels of confidence or self-identity. Jesus knew who he was, what he was about, what he was put here to do. And so our model is not, humility is just feeling bad about yourself. It's knowing who you are, the kind of gifts that you have, the kind of opportunities that God has given you, and seeing his grace as a gift, and then just deploying it in what? In service to others. Give preference to one another in the church in honor. With that said, what I want to do is, the third thing I want you to know about humility, I want to challenge us all to do. If in the one another, in the church, and in our groups, and in our teams, humility and giving preference to one another in honor is a big deal. We should not only be proud of it, we should not only understand it, but I'm going to say we need to cultivate it. Cultivate humility. How do you do that? I'm going to give you a few ways, okay? Write these down if you can. And by the way, when people take notes, preachers do notice and go, yeah, that's my favorite person in the room. Because there's usually like one, okay? So whoever that, I haven't spotted him here at East yet. But write these out. Cultivating humility. Number one, if you want to cultivate humility, develop an understanding of grace. Develop your understanding of grace. And we started with that at the top. We said that Romans 1 through 11, the chapter is all about that subject. God's unmerited favor, the fact that you cannot make yourself right before God. Matter of fact, I want to read kind of a stalwart passage in the book of Romans that sums this idea up beautifully. Listen to what it says in Romans 3:20 and following. Therefore, no one will be declared righteous in God's sight by works of the law. Rather, through the law, we become conscious of sin. In other words, the role of the rules that are written down by God is to make us conscious of our sin and our inability to be right before him. But now, apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been made known, to which the law and the prophets testify. This righteousness is given through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. There is no difference between Jew and Gentile, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and get this line, and are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus. In other words, free is the opposite of what? Of earning and paying. In other words, what Jesus did on the cross is the way to be right before God. Now, I know many of you know that. But if we really want to develop humility, we need to start there. We start off this whole series by saying this table that we're all at, the thing that we have in common, if we have come to Christ and believe in his resurrection, his death, and everything else, is that we have been given this gift. I've used this analogy before. I'm going to again. I like it so much, and many of you probably don't remember it anyway, especially those of you who don't take notes, right? Last Christmas, I gave an analogy because I listened to a professional psychiatrist and theologian give this. And he said that 12-step programs are arguably the only kinds of programs that help people get over addictions and that they know of. Outside the power of God, like a 12-step program is one of the only, if not the only one. And they started with Alcoholics Anonymous back in the 30s. And he said the magic to them, there's a few elements, but the key ingredient that they've observed, and this is a psychiatrist talking and watching how these things work. He said, when you go to an Alcoholics Anonymous or one of the other 12-step programs, your seat at the table is based on your weakness. Your seat at the table is based on your weakness. You arrive there, whether you're a bank president or a senator or someone who slept in your car last night and unemployed, you all are sitting at that table because you're alcoholic, you're an addict. It's based on your weakness. And what happens is even if someone comes in and they don't touch any alcohol for 25 years, what's beautiful about those, they still continue to identify themselves by their weakness at that table. And what that does, that helps the person who's been there for 25 minutes have hope. They're just more experienced, but they still make it based upon their weakness. And that's exactly what the church is supposed to be. That's why it's supposed to be the marker that the local church is supposed to be a humble place. Because we all know you did not earn your right into righteousness before God. You're not going to get to heaven and God goes, finally somebody who I can give this reward to because you've just been so impressive. Man, I'm blown away. Look at this. It's just the opposite. You're at the table because of your weakness. Understand grace. And here's another one. If you want to cultivate humility, understand grace, or develop grace, your understanding of grace, develop your value of people. Develop your value of people. What I mean by that is, and in that passage we saw in Romans, it said, give preference to one another in honor. Give preference to one another in honor. I love looking up the Greek meanings of words and all. That's kind of fun to do that. And the word that's translated honor, in every dictionary I looked at, and every commentator I heard, they all say the word translated honor is tied to value. It's about price tags. We honor things that we think of as valuable. And things in our minds deserve honor because they have some kind of value that gives them value. You notice that you treat the things that are really expensive and really nice with a little bit different kind of attitude and protection as opposed to the things that are cheap in your house. So whether it's material things or people, we tend to give special preference to things that we determine are valuable. So if I want to give preference to one another in honor, you know what that means? I put a high price tag on your forehead. And here's how it goes. Remember, humility is not about looking down on yourself. You're supposed to put a high price tag on you, not because you're anything, but because ultimately God made you in his image and he made you his child and you're in his kingdom. And therefore, you have $1 million price tag on your head. But you know what you're supposed to do? Put a $2 million price tag on someone else's head. Now, I know that sounds crude, but think about what if you really, genuinely, truly honored people in that way. You just did it before. You don't know what they do for a living. You're looking past how they look or how they dress or any of that stuff. You just decided in your mind, I'm going to put a higher price tag on other people than I put on myself. How would you react? I had an amazing experience yesterday. A family member of mine is struggling with ALS. It's Lou Gehrig's disease. And we went to a walk that was kind of there designed to raise money for that whole thing. And you see people, as Stephen Hawking's probably the most famous, besides Lou Gehrig himself, who struggled with this disease. And we were in this place where you saw a lot of that. And it can go into it, and it can affect how you talk and your body, and just people who's, my family member is just healthy as anybody else for a lot of years, and found out he had this, and he's starting to kind of walk down that road. But what blew me away so much, and I love so much, was people who from the outside or just bound to wheelchairs and really, really struggling on physical levels like most of us couldn't even ever relate to. It was cheers. I mean, people were high-fiving. People, they were honored and celebrated. And people were there for them to give and to donate and to help and to walk and cheer. It's like if you were struggling with disease, you had a special place in everybody's mind. And my family member, he kept choking back tears. He said, I'm blown away. And I thought, what if we just did that with everybody, no matter what your challenge was, no matter what your issue was? If people in a local church were placing that on your forehead and treating you accordingly. And with that, I would say the final thing is this: develop actions of service. Develop actions of service. If you want to cultivate humility, develop actions of service. When I say actions, I don't know if you've ever heard of, there's a guy by the name of Rich Roll. I was just exposed to him, and I was listening to a podcast of his, and his story is fascinating to me. What caught my attention was he was like 50 pounds overweight when he was in his 40s and struggled a lot, and was addicted to alcohol, did all this kind of stuff. And he turned it around and actually was voted I don't know how they decide these things, but he was voted by a fitness magazine out there as one of the top 25 most fit individuals in the world. They gave me a call, and I was too humble to kind of say, to add myself into my name. You know, I didn't want to put him in there because I was on that list, but because they're thinking, what kind of list is this thing, you know? No, Rich Roll, he was considered one of the 25 most fit men in the world. And they were asking him on this podcast, you know, what is the secret of that kind of discipline? What is it? And here's a great quote that ties to action. Rich Roll said, understand that mood follows action. The way to change your mental and physical state is to take action first, not wait for your emotional state to change first. Understand that mood follows action. The way to change your mental and physical state is to take the action first, not wait for your emotional state to change first. So in other words, if you want to cultivate humility, give preference to one another in honor. He says it as an action that you can take. Paul says, give preference to one another. And it can start as simple as making sure you're the one that brings everybody drinks at the table. You're the one that's opening the door for other people. Just start in your mind putting a higher price tag on other people and to say, if I really honored this person, how would I act? And it will take place in simple ways, complex ways. But it will be acts of service, and do the action first. Don't wait for, ooh, I'm really feeling humble today. I think I'm going to go out there and do something humble, you know? Because again, humble is this mentality. It's actually offering my gifts, my service to others. Very simple. Think about this for a second. And guys, we challenge you. Around here, we have a phenomenal volunteer culture. 99% of the services you see going on, whether it's worship teams or kids ministries or students or guest service or anything we do around here, 99% of the people that do the stuff around here are volunteers. Do it free of charge, no charge at all. And our staff, like our 1% that's left, really, we're just there to coach and facilitate volunteers. But that's a simple way. When we say do life in teams, it's easy to think that all these people are just doing church programs, you know? I don't look at it that way. I don't think we should either. Every single person, whether they're playing drums on a worship team or making the coffee, can we give it up for those who make the coffee every single Sunday? That's right. I'm surprised there's not a standing O in this room right now. Because if we didn't make it one week, yeah, we'd give dessert, our numbers would plummet. We all know that. It's all dependent on the people that show up early. But each of those people, the one that's taking care of your child in the nursery right now, they're not just doing a church program. You know what they're doing? They're taking an action of service. They're serving you. They're serving the rest of the body. The drummer, can you imagine pulling all the drums out of our songs? Wouldn't that be a drag? But he's not just kind of up there banging through songs. He's serving you and I. Do an action of service. You want to cultivate humility. Understand grace. Understand grace. Develop your value of people and develop actions of service. So my challenge to us is to be the kind of place that does that across the community. Now, across all three campuses, I'd like you to do something for them. Just everybody bow their heads, close their eyes. I want you to have a private moment kind of in your own heart. And at each campus of each of our prayer teams could come forward at this time. And we always offer prayer. And while no one's looking around, if you need special prayer for anything at all, family challenges or health issues, or you just want someone to pray for you, make your way up to the front now. No one's gonna, pay attention to that stuff. Just go up and have one of our team members pray for you. But what I want to do over the next few moments before we close is guide everybody in a prayer. Just challenge you to pray a few things based upon the message. And the first one's this: pray in your own words, in your own heart, that God will give you a deeper understanding of grace. That God will give you a deeper understanding of His grace. However you say that, just spend some time. We're going to let it fall silent, and you can pray that. Number two, pray that God will give you the ability to value people more. That He'll just take out some blinders that you have in your mind. A lot of us are pretty self-centered. We all are. Say, Lord, help me to see others as valuable. Help me to see your value for people, so I will act accordingly. I will serve them with joy and because I genuinely value who they are. Just in your own words and own way, please pray something like that. Finally, pray that God would let you see actions that you can take to serve, just to cultivate that humility. Actions that you can take, and help him to just say, Lord, help me to open my eyes to the simple things I can do, whether it's holding open doors or serving someone at a table or whatever the case may be, or something that's inside the church or outside the church. Show me how I can offer my power, my influence, my gifts, my stuff in service of others. Give me a specific thing to show me over these next few days how I can do that. Just pray that in your own way, in your own words. If there's never been a time where you have embraced that idea that the only way you can be right before God is a gift from him, you can use this prayer time just to say, God, by the way, I want that gift. I don't want to depend on my own moral upstanding to be right before you. I believe in what Jesus did for me on the cross. I believe his resurrection. I want to walk with you. Come into my life. And now, Father, we come before you and we thank you, and I pray that one life will be an environment that's marked by humility, because that's what you want. Help us to give preference to one another and serve one another in honor. Help us to put those high price tags on each other and honor one another on new levels by the power of your Spirit and for the glory of who Jesus is. We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.